I need food, which is why in the last episode we started off on that process by making this cute little apiary garden to make a honey farm. Although, while it has a lot of honey and a lot of bees, it is far from actually being automatic, which is why we're starting off with that today. Now you might be asking yourself, why do I need honey as a food source? After all, it's not a very good one. I should be doing something like golden carrots or a cooked pork chop. Well, with the Create mod installed, we have something called honeyed apples, which are just as good as cooked pork chop, which makes me very happy because it's a much more fun food source to farm compared to the 5 minutes it takes to make a farm for cooked pork chop and then just the kind of boring process of the production of it. So instead, we're making a fully automatic honeyed apple farm, with this honey farm being the first step. So let's go ahead and make this thing automatic, and to do that, all I have to do is hook up pipes to the bottom of all of these beehives so that whenever the bees produce honey, it will get pumped out of the hive and stored in a tank over here, which brings us to this building, which is actually what I'm going to be working on first. This is where the entire production system for the honeyed apples will take place. Hopefully we won't get bees inside of it, but currently it doesn't have much of an interior. So before I make an actual honey farm to get honey into this building, I'd like to have a place for it to go. So we're going to go ahead and finish up the interior of, so far, my favorite building that I've built in this series. Which of course means it deserves what I think is the best interior I've done in this series so far. The entryway leads to this very cramped little stairway, and if we head into the adjacent room, we have all of the functional components of this building. We have a sign that says how much honey is in the tank down here, which will eventually be the output of the currently non-existent honey farm. We have a barrel that will be the output of the also non-existent honeyed apple farm, and we have the little spout that is going to be honeying the apples. It gets fed from the tank down below, and the apples will be put onto that depot. So that is all of the functional stuff, and the room other than that is pretty boring. We have a nice little bush in the corner for some added decoration, but that's about it. And the rest of the building is completely decorative, but if we head up this staircase past the weirdest plant I've ever placed, we get to the upstairs where we have some nice windows over the village and the forest and the nothing, and of course we have the super cramped little bedroom. Something I didn't really think about when I was designing the exterior of this building was actually making this interior, because a lot of the rooms are really small and super awkward spaces, namely this stairwell, which I don't really want the roof to be this low, but for this stairwell to make sense at all and have it actually get to this door, it kinda has to be. And you'll notice there's this weird little rise and then immediately go back down, and it all kinda works, but it's a little bit awkward. Anyway, I think this interior did turn out quite well. Like I said earlier, it's the best one I've built in this series, which is not a very high bar when you have amazing things like this as an interior, but you know, it is a pretty good job, so I'm happy with it. And now we have to actually build the functional part of the farm. I did a little bit of that functionality with this tank and the pump that feeds up into the spout up here, but this tank currently isn't going to get filled with honey anytime soon. So the next project is to add the pipe network that will take honey from all of the beehives over here and pump it into this tank. So I used the schematic cannon to place down all the pipes, and it broke my doors. I don't really know what happened, and if you break them, you don't get the door, which kind of makes sense because, you know, there's not really a full door there, but I guess I'll fix that later because we have more pressing concerns, like this pipe network that does not work. I made it, and in the creative world, it worked fine, and it even looks like it's working fine. If we go inside one of these hives, you can see the honey is kind of getting, like, sucked down, and, yeah, all the pumps are spinning and stuff. It just isn't going into this tank for some reason. I have no idea why. I'm going to try replacing all the pumps and see if that fixes it, because that's my best guess. But yeah, currently does not work in the slightest. That is the last pump replaced, and ideally it should be working now, but we still have absolutely no honey in that tank, yet we do still have the honey getting sucked down out of the hive. So yeah, no, I'm still at a complete loss, and also none of these intermediary tanks are filled either, which they kind of should be. So I'm kind of at a loss for ideas other than just replace the entire pipe network, which I guess that's what I'm gonna do. Actually, I've just had a better idea. I was looking around, I cleared all these pipes so you can actually see them, and there's no honey in this tank, but if we go up top, There is honey in the little spout up here, which doesn't have a very large capacity. That looks like it's 2 beehives worth of honey, which means that some of the hives are working, and I'm guessing that those some are these ones and these ones because they are powered by this pump, which does not have one of those intermediary tanks in front of it. So my theory is that these tanks are the problem and not the entire fluid system, because I actually had to replace this tank when I first built it to make it function. So I'm going to replace that, and I actually think that that should make the farm fully functional. Oh, and if you're wondering why these tanks exist in the first place, it's pretty much to make all of these pumps one way, so they're not pushing honey into tubes that are like further in front of them. Instead, they are only sucking honey out of the tubes behind them, which is what I want them to do. And this does seem to be working, because now these tanks are actually filling up with honey, which would mean that hopefully the honey is getting to its final destination. And if we zoom over there real quick, yeah, we have honey in the tank. Okay, beautiful. So that is a fully functioning honey farm. We have a whole 509 millibuckets, which is a number that doesn't make any sense to me because it should only be harvestable in increments of 333. But whatever, it's working, and that's all I really care about. So this thing will continue to produce honey as we go along, although it would help if it wasn't raining. Now we have to actually get onto the apple part of this honeyed apple production system. Now theoretically, I already have an apple farm. It's this tree right here, but at the moment it doesn't really work, and actually it's been broken for a while. It got me about 2 stacks of golden apples, which is all I needed for the villager project, and then it broke, and I've kind of just been ignoring it because I didn't think I'd need it again, but now I do, so I have to fix this thing. So, what is the problem? So the problem is the way I had the chopping system work. Pretty much these 2 things that are at a super weird angle right now are supposed to chop down the tree, and the way they did that is when the timing was correct and it knew there was already a grown tree, it would unpower this clutch and spin them for a predetermined amount of time. That amount of time was supposed to be enough for them to go to the surface, chop down this tree, and then rotate back to their starting positions to get emptied by these 3 funnels. And you might notice, because of their current position, it did not do that at all. And that's because anytime there was a lag spike, this timer just kinda didn't work, so they got to just the wrong position, and ever since then they do not work at all. So I want to make a system that instead of breaking whenever there's a lag spike, I want it to actually be 100% reliable and never break down, which shouldn't be that hard to do, and I don't really know why I didn't do it in the first place. Yeah, so it turned out this farm had way more wrong with it than I initially thought. It is not just the chopping down system. I looked at this thing in a creative world and was just looking at like every single part of the farm pretty much and just being like, that one's wrong and that one's wrong. Just the entire thing did not function properly, so I ended up redesigning the entire thing, which did take quite a while, but I'm really happy with it. It's a ton more streamlined now. I mean, you can just see how much less of this hole it takes up compared to what it used to look like, and it's pretty much the same system for all of that. It just actually works. We start with these 2 deployers that place saplings every 2 seconds, and that is the major way I fixed things, is everything is going just more often and not trying to like detect or time when the tree is actually grown or when it needs to place saplings, so everything just always is going, which is kind of fine because you need the power for it all to be going anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Then this little bone meal thing, bone meals the trees, it occasionally launches you, and that one is pretty much the same, except the bone meal now goes directly to it instead of having a mechanical arm, which just saves a little bit of stress impact. Then, of course, this chopper goes up and chops the tree down. This is just constantly going, except when it stops for the storage to interface. And that's about it. This little thing is just item distribution, and probably my favorite part is the saplings get dropped down here, and they need to be distributed to here, but also if there's extras, they need to be trashed. So I've made a little system that deposits them here, and then if they don't go up to there within a certain amount of time, they get incinerated by the lava beneath it. So the whole system just works really well. And you might notice it's not doing anything right now, and don't worry, it's not because it's broken, it's just because it's off, because none of the 2 systems that rely on this farm actually need logs or apples right now. So the logs go to the steam engine over here, and the apples go to the golden apple production thing over here, which which is currently off, hence it not needing apples. But with this farm fixed, we can actually get on to making the next thing, which is going to be the honeyed apple production system. And that should be pretty easy. All we have to do is get the apples from this farm over into this building and then honey them. So let's go ahead and build that. Yeah, that was in fact pretty easy. Nothing really looks different up here, except for there's a 0 there now. But if we head down below, there is now a giant item vault to store extra apples, as well as a little auto arm to get the apples from there up to this little thing where they get honeyed. And all I have to do now is actually turn on the farm, which should be as simple as doing that. And now the tree farm should be running, even though neither of the two systems that like cause it to turn on are going, because that just is what that does. And any second now, we should be getting apples. There we go. And now we are getting honeyed apples in this barrel, which is pretty cool. That should be fully functional. And if I wait here, we should get a decent bit of honeyed apples, like per hour. I don't actually know. It's not going to be at full capacity just yet because the honey farm is not quite done. We'll get to that in a second. But it also should just kind of store any apples that it gets that are extra in this giant item vault. It has a capacity of 100,000, so we are never running out of space. And of course, you can see that number right there. So now all we have to do, theoretically, is finish the honey farm. But before we do that, I want to actually let the entire system run for about an hour, because the amount of apples that are going through this thing currently is not a lot. I mean, you can like watch it and the tree farm's going. It's like, it's growing trees. They're getting chopped down, sometimes very slowly. Apples just don't actually make their way through that often. I think you're definitely not guaranteed an apple per tree, so it's just not the fastest system. So I want to AFK for an hour and just pay attention to these two numbers and see if honey is actually still the limiting factor. And if it is, we will make the honey farm better. And if it's not, then we're kind of done. So I'll see you in an hour. Well, it hasn't even been a full hour, and that apple is not getting honeyed because the honey is all gone in. And now it's raining just to add the icing on the cake, so the bees aren't out baking anymore either. So pretty much I have to make this honey farm better, because if this is going to happen, then we're not going to get very many honeyed apples each time. But this ran out about like with 15 minutes left. I wasn't paying super great attention, so let's see how many apples we got in that time. That is like 2.5 stacks, and plus these 14 that it made while I was like waiting to start the hour. So that's pretty good. If we can get this honey farm to actually keep up with the amount of apples we get from the tree farm, then like that's a solid food source that like I can AFK overnight and I'll probably get like a full shulker box of it, and that will last me a while until I just do that again. Then we're good for food forever. So let's go ahead and improve this honey farm. And the way we're going to do that is actually super simple. I've got 3 stacks of rose bushes here, and once it stops raining, I'm just going to breed bees until they actually fill all of these hives, because you'll notice a lot of these are just completely empty and don't even have like a couple levels of honey like a lot of the other ones do, and that's because they don't have bees in them. I have about 34 hives around here, 35 if you count that one, which isn't part of the farm, so I'm not, and they're just not filled with bees. That gets us to about like 80 or 100 bees, and I definitely don't have that many, so I'm just going to sit here once it stops raining and breed some bees until all of these hives are full. If this was real life, I would be terrified right now, but luckily bees in Minecraft are nice and cute cubes, so it doesn't bother me quite as much. But there's a lot of bees now. I think we have over 100, which would mean we actually have more bees than there are spaces in hives for the bees, but that's kind of fine. It'll make the farm more efficient if the bees don't just leave because they don't think they have homes at night. But it should be much more efficient now that we have a ton more bees. So we're going to go ahead and test it out. I've kind of had it on while I've been breeding bees, and we're up to 68 apples and no honey. So it does seem like the honey is still slower, but it doesn't really matter if it keeps up so much as if it generates a good amount of honeyed apples. So we're going to test that out by AFKing for another hour. Actually, 1 minute, there is a pretty serious problem. I literally just left the building, went out to the tree farm, and there are items everywhere, which means the storage on the chopping mechanism is completely full, and this thing is just like throwing everything it gets on the ground, and that is an issue. I don't really know why that's happening. It shouldn't do that, but yeah, I guess I have to figure that out before I can AFK with this thing. Oh, I found the problem. There are just a couple sticks in the system, you know, just Just some. Oh god, I think literally all 3 of these barrels are completely filled with sticks. I forgot that trees drop sticks. It's not like the most recent thing at this point, but I completely forgot about it. Luckily, that is not the worst thing to happen, and it's a pretty easy solution. Just have to make a little hole off of this thing and give it a stick filter. And now, yeah, all the sticks will just be trashed, and the apples will still be able to go on through. Okay, we should be good now. Instead of having this clog up with sticks, all the sticks will just be trashed as it goes on. So let's go AFK for that hour. Okay, that one went a lot better. Honey is now outpacing apples, and we only got about like 3 stacks plus a couple extra. We already had like those 8 stacks when we started, so the rate isn't that much more increased, and I could make the apple farm better to compensate for the honey farm, but honestly, I slept through every single night of that hour, and if I'm not doing that, then it'll probably balance out because the honey farm won't be producing during the nighttime or while it's raining, so I'm not going to. And also that would kind of just lead to a cycle of improve that farm, improve this farm, improve that farm, improve this farm, and I could just do that forever. They're never going to be perfectly balanced, so we're just gonna leave it at that. So with that whole system done, I can finally take some honeyed apples and get rid of these darn baked potatoes that I've been eating since almost the beginning of this series, and I can finally chow down on some beautiful honeyed apples, which by the way is like such a yummy food even in real life. I've had honeyed apples or like caramel apples once, but they're so good. So yeah, but I think that's going to be it for this episode. We got a new food source. It is much better, just as good as cooked pork chop. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and end this episode here. We made a ton of progress, but I will see you in the next one.